I didn't cry when they lowered my son into the ground. Everyone expected me to. I saw it in their eyes, the quiet anticipation, the sympathetic glances, the subtle leaning forward as if waiting for the moment I would break.
But I didn't give them that.
Instead, I stood there in complete stillness, my fingers locked around the handle of my black handbag, so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The wind brushed against my face, carrying the scent of damp earth and lilies, and all I could think was how wrong everything felt. 7 days. It had only been 7 days since Daniel died. 7 days since my entire world collapsed into something unrecognizable. People kept coming up to me, whispering the same hollow phrases. He's in a better place. You have to stay strong. Time will help.
Time.
I almost laughed at that word. Time didn't heal anything. Time only stretched the pain, made it settle deeper into your bones until it became part of you. I nodded politely, thanked them when necessary, played the role they expected from me, the grieving mother holding herself together with dignity. But inside, there was nothing but a cold, empty space where my heart used to be. When the ceremony finally ended, I thought I would get a moment to breathe. I was wrong. My phone buzzed inside my bag. At first, I ignored it. It felt almost disrespectful to even think about anything else at that moment. But something instinct, maybe, pushed me to take it out. One notification. Social media. From her. My daughter-in-law, Emily. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it. And then everything inside me went still. There she was, standing in front of a mirror. Perfect posture. Perfect makeup. Perfect lighting. Wearing a black dress that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. Not a single sign of grief on her face. And the caption, "A new chapter begins. Ready to take my place." For a second, I thought I had misunderstood. That maybe grief was distorting my perception. But no. I read it again. And again. Each time, the words became sharper, colder, like tiny blades carving into my chest. 7 days. 7 days after my son's death, and she was already announcing her new chapter. Not mourning him. Not honoring him. Claiming what he left behind. My grip tightened around the phone. I slowly lifted my gaze and found her across the cemetery. She was speaking to people, Daniel's colleagues, business partners, acquaintances. Her face was carefully arranged into an expression of soft sorrow. She touched their arms gently, lowered her eyes at the right moments, nodded at their condolences. A perfect performance. If I hadn't seen that post, I might have believed it. But now I saw everything. Every calculated gesture. Every rehearsed expression. Every move designed to position herself exactly where she wanted to be. At the center. At the top. In control. Olivia? I turned slightly. It was Margaret, an old family friend. Her voice was gentle, cautious. You look pale. Are you all right? I handed her my phone without saying a word. She looked at the screen. Her expression changed instantly.
Shock.
Then anger. Then something else, understanding. She posted this today? She asked quietly. Minutes ago, I replied. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was too calm, too steady. Margaret handed the phone back slowly. This isn't right. No, I said. It isn't. I glanced once more at Emily. She caught my eye for just a fraction of a second. And in that moment, her expression slipped. Just for an instant. The softness disappeared. And something cold replaced it. Not grief. Not sadness. Calculation. Then it was gone again, like it had never been there. But I saw it. And that was enough. You always had doubts about her, Margaret said carefully. I didn't have proof, I answered. But you felt it. Yes. I exhaled slowly, my gaze fixed on Emily. When Daniel first introduced her, I noticed the way she looked at everything. Not him, Not really. What do you mean? She looked at the house, the cars, the people around him, the life he had. Margaret didn't respond. She didn't need to. We both knew what I was saying. He thought I was being unfair, I continued. He told me she loved him for who he was. And you didn't believe it. I wanted to, I said quietly. That was the truth that hurt the most. I wanted to be wrong. For his sake. But mothers know. We always know. The crowd began to thin as people started leaving the cemetery. Conversations faded into distant murmurs, footsteps crunching softly against the gravel paths. Emily was still there, of course, still working the room, still playing her role. I watched her approach one of Daniel's senior partners, a man who controlled millions in investments. Her posture shifted subtly, more engaged, more attentive, more alive. That was when something inside me finally settled into place. Not grief. Not yet. Something colder.
Clearer. Purpose.
Olivia, Margaret said softly. What are you thinking? I didn't answer immediately. I looked at the freshly covered grave, at the flowers, at the name carved into the stone.
Daniel.
My son.
Gone.
And her, already moving on.
No.
Not moving on. Moving up. I'm thinking, I said slowly, that she believes she's already won. Margaret's eyes searched mine. And has she? I finally turned away from the grave and met her gaze. No, I said. My voice was steady now.
Certain.
She's just made her first mistake. Margaret frowned slightly. What are you going to do? I glanced once more at Emily. She laughed softly at something someone said.
Laughed.
At my son's funeral, a strange calm spread through me, the kind that comes right before a storm. I'm going to find out who she really is, I said. And when I do, I paused, because even I didn't yet know how far I was willing to go. But I knew one thing for sure. I would not sit quietly. I would not let her take everything my family had built. And I would not let Daniel's death become just another step in her rise. She thinks I'm weak, I finished. Margaret didn't speak. She thinks I'm just a grieving mother. I allowed myself a faint, humorless smile. She has no idea what she started. The morning after the funeral, I woke up before sunrise, not because I had rested, but because my mind refused to stay still any longer. Grief was still there, heavy, suffocating, but something else had taken root beside it.
Clarity.
Cold, sharp clarity. For the first time since Daniel died, I wasn't just reacting to pain. I was thinking, planning. I sat at the edge of my bed for a long time, staring at my hands. They didn't tremble anymore. That alone told me everything had changed. Emily thought she had stepped into power. She thought Daniel's death had left a vacuum she could simply fill. What she didn't understand was that she had walked into something much older than her ambition, something built over decades, something that didn't fall apart just because one piece was removed. And I was still here. I dressed carefully that morning. Not in black this time, but in a deep navy suit I used to wear to board meetings years ago. Structured. Precise. Controlled. I needed to remind people, and myself, who I was before grief tried to reduce me to nothing more than a mourning figure in the background. My first stop wasn't the company. It was someone far less obvious. A man named Victor Hale. He had been our driver for nearly 15 years before Emily convinced Daniel that it was time to modernize. That was her phrase. I remembered it clearly because of how easily Daniel agreed, brushing it off like a small, practical decision. It wasn't small. Nothing she did ever was. I found Victor working for a private car service on the edge of the city. When he saw me, his entire posture changed, surprise first, then something like relief. Mrs. Olivia, he said quickly, stepping forward. I'm so sorry about Daniel. Thank you, I replied. I won't take much of your time, but I need to ask you something important. He nodded immediately. Anything. We sat in a small break room that smelled faintly of coffee and engine oil. I didn't waste time. When you worked for us, did you ever notice anything unusual about Emily? The question lingered in the air for a moment. Victor looked down, rubbing his hands together slowly. I don't know if it's my place. It is, I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. My son is dead, and I need the truth. That changed something. He exhaled heavily and nodded.
There were calls, he said.
Late at night, when Daniel was away on business trips, she would go outside, not inside the house, always outside, like she didn't want to be overheard. I leaned forward slightly. Did you ever hear what she said? Not clearly, but once she mentioned timing, said something like, "We're close now." A chill moved through me, slow and deliberate. What else? Victor hesitated again, then continued. I drove her a few times to places she didn't tell Daniel about. Cafes, mostly. She would ask me to wait in the car. But I saw her meeting someone. My heartbeat slowed instead of quickening. That was how I knew this mattered. A man? I asked. He nodded. Did you recognize him?
No.
But they didn't act like strangers. More like partners. That word settled heavily between us. Did you ever tell Daniel? Victor gave a sad, almost helpless smile. I tried.
Carefully.
But he didn't want to hear it. Said I was reading too much into things.
Of course he did.
Daniel had always believed in people. It was one of the things I loved most about him. And now it might have been the thing that killed him. There's something else, Victor added, lowering his voice slightly. A few days before I was let go, I overheard her again. She was on the phone, and she said, "Once this is done, we won't have to worry anymore." Silence followed. Not empty silence. The kind that confirms your worst suspicions. Victor, I said quietly, before Daniel died, did he seem different? Victor didn't hesitate this time. Yes.
How?
Forgetful.
Distracted.
Sometimes confused. I thought it was stress. He was working a lot. I nodded slowly. That matched what I had noticed too. At the time, I had accepted it. Now, I wasn't so sure. I thanked Victor and left him my number, telling him to call me if he remembered anything else. As I walked back to my car, the world felt sharper somehow, like every detail had gained meaning. This wasn't grief anymore. This was a puzzle, and pieces were starting to appear. My next stop was the company headquarters. The building stood exactly as it always had: glass, steel, power. My husband had built it from nothing. Daniel had expanded it into something far greater than either of us had imagined. And now, Emily was inside, claiming it. When I walked through the doors, the receptionist froze for a split second before quickly standing. "Miss Olivia, we didn't know you were coming." "That's all right," I said calmly. "I'd like to see Daniel's attorney." She hesitated. That was all I needed to see. "I'm afraid he's in meetings all day." "I'll wait."
I didn't ask. He said.
20 minutes later, I didn't see the attorney. I saw Emily. She stepped out of one of the conference rooms, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. Her expression shifted when she noticed me. Surprise first, then immediate recovery. "Olivia," she said smoothly. "I didn't expect you here." "I'm sure you didn't." She approached me with that same carefully measured grace I had seen at the funeral. "I was just finishing up some important discussions," she continued. "There's a lot to manage now." "I can imagine." She smiled slightly. "As you know, Daniel left everything to me. So naturally, I have to step in." There it was.
No hesitación. No scham.
Just ownership. "I'd like to speak with the attorney," I said. Her smile tightened just a fraction. "I'm sure he'll tell you the same thing I just did. Everything is already settled." At that moment, the attorney finally appeared, and the look on his face told me everything. Avoidance. discomfort,
guilt.
He didn't meet my eyes. Olivia, he said quickly, I didn't realize you were here. Clearly. I stood. Do you have time to speak? He glanced at Emily. Not even subtly. That was enough. I have another meeting shortly, he said. Perhaps we can schedule something. That won't be necessary. I cut in. Both of them went still. I'll be finding new legal representation. Emily didn't react immediately.
But I saw it again.
That flicker. Not fear, but calculation adjusting. Recalibrating. I turned and walked out without another word. Because now I understood something important. This wasn't just about Emily. She wasn't acting alone. By the time I got home, the grief returned, but it felt different now. It no longer paralyzed me. It fueled me. That evening, as I sat alone in the dim light of my study, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Olivia, a woman's voice said, nervous and quiet. You don't know me, but I worked with Daniel recently, and there's something you need to know. My entire body went still, because I had the sudden, overwhelming certainty. This was the moment everything was about to change. I didn't interrupt her. Not once. Something in her voice, fragile, hesitant, like she was stepping into something dangerous, told me that if I pushed too hard, she might disappear just as quickly as she had appeared. I'm listening, I said quietly. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a soft exhale. I worked at a private clinic, she continued. Daniel came in about 3 weeks before he died. I was assisting during his appointment. My grip on the phone tightened slightly. Go on. At first, everything was routine. He had a mild heart condition, nothing severe. He'd been on the same medication for years. Stable. Predictable. That didn't surprise me. Daniel had always been careful with his health. So what changed? I asked. Another pause. His wife insisted on speaking privately with the doctor, she said. After that, his prescription was adjusted. Adjusted how? It was stronger, she said. Much stronger than what he had been taking before. I remember thinking it didn't make sense. There was no clear reason for such a drastic change. A slow, cold sensation spread through my chest. Did you question it? I tried, she admitted. But the doctor shut me down. Said it wasn't my place. Of course he did. Because someone had made sure it wasn't. What's your name? I asked. I'd rather not say, she replied quickly. I could lose my job. I saw the news, and I couldn't stay silent. I understand, I said. And you did the right thing. The line went quiet for a moment. Then she added, softer this time, he was kind. Not like most of the patients we see. I didn't want what happened to him to just be ignored. After we hung up, I didn't move. Not immediately. I sat there in the dim light, staring at nothing, replaying every word she had said. Stronger medication. Private conversation. Sudden death. It wasn't proof, but it wasn't nothing. And combined with what Victor had told me, it was starting to form a pattern. A deliberate one. The doorbell rang. The sound cut through the silence like a blade. For a brief moment, I froze, not out of fear, but because my mind was already running ahead, calculating possibilities. When I opened the door, a courier stood there holding an envelope. Delivery for Olivia, he said. I signed for it without thinking and closed the door. Only when I turned the envelope over did I feel it. That subtle shift in the air. Something wasn't right. There was no return address.
No Marquines.
Just my name. I opened it slowly, and as I read the contents, something inside me snapped into absolute stillness. An eviction notice. 30 days. That was all I had. 30 days to leave the house I had lived in for over 40 years. The house where I raised my son. The house my husband built. The house that now, according to the document in my hands, belonged entirely to Emily. I sank into the nearest chair, the paper crumpling slightly in my grip. For a moment, the grief came back with full force, raw, overwhelming, suffocating. Not just for Daniel, but for everything, for the life that was being erased piece by piece. But then, it passed. Not completely, but enough. Enough for something else to take its place. Resolve. If Emily thought this would break me, she had made a mistake. A very serious one. I didn't fight the eviction. Not yet. That wasn't the battle I wanted. Not when I didn't fully understand the war. Instead, I moved quietly,
Carefully.
Within 2 days, I had relocated everything that truly mattered: photographs, personal documents, items that carried meaning no amount of money could replace. I left the rest behind. Let her have the furniture, the walls, the empty shell. What mattered, she couldn't touch. The apartment I rented was small, simple, barely enough space for everything I brought with me. But it had one advantage.
She didn't know about it.
And right now, that mattered more than comfort. On the third evening, as I was unpacking the last of my things, there was a knock at the door. I froze instantly. Every instinct sharpened. I hadn't told anyone where I was. Carefully, I stepped closer and looked through the peephole. And then I exhaled. Margaret. I opened the door quickly. "How did you find me?" I asked. "Victor told me," she said, stepping inside. "I hope you don't mind." "I don't," I replied. "Not at all." She carried a small bag with her, setting it down on the table. "I brought you dinner," she said simply. For a moment, I didn't trust myself to respond, because that small act of kindness felt heavier than anything else that had happened in the past few days. We sat together in silence for a while before she finally spoke again. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. I looked up. Her expression had changed. Serious now. Focused. "What is it?" "It's about Emily." Of course it was. "I didn't say anything before," Margaret continued, "because I didn't have proof. And I didn't want to create problems without being sure. And now," she reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "I started looking into her after she had me dismissed," she said. "Something about her never felt right to me." I took the envelope slowly. Inside were copies of documents, records, articles, fragments of a past that didn't match the story Emily had told. "Her name isn't even Emily," Margaret said quietly. I looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "She changed it," Margaret replied. "A few years ago. Before that, she was someone else entirely." A strange calm settled over me as I looked back down at the papers.
Different city.
Different life. Different men. 2 of them. Both wealthy. Both dead.
Suddenly.
Unexpectedly. And both leaving everything behind to her. I didn't speak for a long time, because now, this wasn't suspicion anymore. This was a pattern, a method, a strategy. "She's done this before?" I said finally. Margaret nodded slowly. "I think so." I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for just a second. Daniel's face appeared instantly in my mind, and for the first time, the thought came clearly. Not fear, not doubt, certainty. This wasn't an accident. When I opened my eyes again, everything felt different. Sharper, colder, focused. "She didn't just marry him," I said quietly. "She chose him." Margaret didn't respond, because there was nothing to argue. "We need proof," she said instead. "Yes," I agreed. And then I added, more to myself than to her. "And I know exactly where to start." Because now I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was moving forward. And for the first time since Daniel died, I felt like I was getting closer to the truth. The next morning, I made a call I had been avoiding for years. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I knew exactly what it would cost me. "Hello?" The voice on the other end answered, sharp, controlled, familiar. "It's me," I said. There was silence. Not confusion. Recognition. Then finally, Olivia. My sister-in-law had never been a sentimental woman. Even now, after everything that had happened, her tone didn't soften. I heard about Daniel, she added.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Another pause. We both knew this wasn't a social call. You wouldn't be calling me unless you needed something, she said. She was right. I need your help. That got her attention.
I'm listening.
I didn't hold anything back. I told her everything. The funeral, Emily's behavior, the will, the eviction, Victor's story, the anonymous call from the clinic, the documents Margaret had uncovered. When I finished, there was a long silence. Not empty.
Calculating.
Analyzing. Elizabeth had spent most of her career building cases against people who thought they were untouchable, and Emily was exactly that kind of person. Meet me tomorrow, she finally said. 10 a.m. Where? I'll send you the address. And Olivia? Yes. Be careful. The line went dead. That night I didn't sleep, not because of fear, but because everything was aligning too quickly, too cleanly. And that usually meant one of two things. Either I was finally seeing the truth, or I was walking into something much bigger than I realized. The next morning, I arrived at Elizabeth's house exactly on time. She lived in an older part of the city, quiet streets, tall trees, houses that had history built into their walls. It suited her. Controlled.
Private.
Strategic. She opened the door before I even knocked. You look tired, she said. So do you. I've been working, she replied, stepping aside to let me in. Of course she had. Her study looked exactly like I expected, organized, precise, every surface occupied by documents, notes, files already in progress. She didn't waste time. I made some calls, she said, handing me a folder. I took it, and as I began flipping through the pages, I felt it again. That cold clarity. Daniel did change his will, she said. I looked up, but not the way Emily claims. My heart slowed. What do you mean? Elizabeth stepped closer, pointing to a document. This is the legitimate version. Filed properly. Verified. Signed. I scanned it quickly, and then I saw it. My name. Not erased. Not removed.
Still there.
He added her. Elizabeth continued. But he didn't give her everything. Control of the company, the estate, that was still meant to stay with you. I looked back at her slowly. Then the version she has is fake, Elizabeth said calmly. The word landed with weight. Not suspicion.
Not theory. Fact.
A forgery, she added. I leaned back slightly, processing. Because this changed everything. This wasn't manipulation anymore. This was crime. Deliberate.
Planned.
Executed. But how? I asked. The attorney. I checked. Elizabeth cut in. He recently changed firms. Quietly.
No announcement.
No clear reason. And that kind of move usually comes with pressure. Or leverage. I didn't need her to explain further. Emily hadn't just inserted herself into Daniel's life. She had positioned herself around every weak point.
And exploited them.
Do we have proof? I asked. Not enough yet, Elizabeth replied. But we will. She turned back to her desk, pulling out another document. I also looked into her past. My chest tightened slightly. Margaret already found something. I went deeper, Elizabeth said. She handed me another file. Names.
Dates.
Locations.
Patterns.
The same story. Repeated.
Different men.
Same outcome. Sudden death. Inherited wealth. Disappearance. Reinvention. She doesn't just move on, Elizabeth said quietly. She resets. I stared at the pages in silence, because now there was no doubt left. Emily wasn't lucky. She wasn't opportunistic. She was methodical. She planned Daniel, I said. Elizabeth didn't argue. Yes. The room felt colder somehow. Not physically, but mentally. Because now the question wasn't if. It was how. And more importantly, who else was involved? We're missing something, I said. Elizabeth nodded. Yes. And we need it soon. Why soon? She looked at me directly. Because right now, she controls everything. The company, the assets, the accounts. Every day she has access. She can move money, I finished. Exactly. That was when it hit me. This wasn't just about the past. This was happening now. She's not done, I said quietly. No, Elizabeth agreed. She's in the middle of it. Silence fell between us again. But this time, it wasn't uncertainty. It was focus. So, what's the next move? I asked. Elizabeth didn't hesitate. We apply pressure. How? We don't go after her directly. Not yet. We disrupt her control. Slow her down. Make her make mistakes. I understood immediately. You want to corner her. Yes. And while she reacts, we build the case. A slow breath left my lungs. This was no longer just personal. This was strategic, controlled, precise. For the first time since Daniel died, I felt like I wasn't chasing answers. I was closing in on them. That evening, I started making calls. Not emotional ones. Not desperate ones. Calculated ones. Old contacts. People who owed favors. People who understood influence. I didn't tell them everything. Just enough. Concerns about financial irregularities. Temporary caution. Delays. Additional approvals. By the end of the day, the first cracks began to appear. Transactions slowed. Requests stalled. Questions surfaced. Nothing obvious. Nothing direct. But enough. Enough to disrupt her rhythm. Enough to force her attention. The next day, Elizabeth called me. She tried to move money, she said. How much? 2 million. And blocked. I closed my eyes briefly. Good. She's going to panic, I said. Yes, Elizabeth replied. And when she does, she makes mistakes. Exactly. But before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. I opened it and instantly felt the air shift around me. Stop now. You don't know how far this goes. I stared at the screen. No signature. No explanation. Just a warning. I forwarded it to Elizabeth without a word. A few seconds later, my phone rang. Olivia, she said immediately. This just escalated. I know. This means we're close. Or it meant something else. Something more dangerous. They said I don't know how far this goes. I said slowly. Elizabeth didn't respond right away, because she understood what that meant. This might be bigger than just her, she said finally. Yes. Silence. Then, stay where you are tonight, she added. Don't take any risks. I didn't argue, but as I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, staring at that message again, one thought became impossible to ignore. Emily wasn't just protecting herself. She was protecting something else. Someone else. And whoever that was, they were watching. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid, not in the way most people understand fear, but because my mind refused to slow down. The message kept replaying over and over in my head. You don't know how far this goes. It wasn't just a threat. It was a warning. And warnings like that don't come from someone desperate. They come from someone confident. Which meant one thing. We were getting close. But not close enough. By morning, I had already made my decision. If someone wanted me to stop, I would do the opposite. I went to Elizabeth's house before she even had time to call me. She opened the door with a look that told me she already knew. You're not backing off, she said. No. She studied my face for a moment, then stepped aside. Good, she replied, because neither am I. We moved straight into her study, where new documents were already spread across the desk. She didn't waste time with explanations. I've been digging into the man Victor mentioned, she said. The one Emily was meeting. Yes. She handed me a file. His name is Adrian Keller. I scanned the page quickly. Age, background, employment history, and then pharmaceutical industry. My eyes lifted immediately. That's not a coincidence, I said. No, Elizabeth agreed. It isn't. A slow realization began forming. Medication, private consultations, sudden deterioration. This connects everything, I murmured. Almost, she corrected, but we still need direct proof. Before I could respond, her phone rang. She answered immediately, her expression shifting as she listened. When she hung up, she looked at me with something new in her eyes. Not concern, not caution.
Certainty.
That was Detective Harris, she said. They've reopened Daniel's case. My chest tightened. Why now? Because new evidence just came in. What kind of evidence? Elizabeth held my gaze for a moment. Toxicology. The words settled heavily in the room. They found elevated levels of his medication, she continued, far beyond the prescribed dose. I felt something cold settle deep inside me. Not shock. Not anymore. Confirmation. So it wasn't natural, I said quietly.
No.
I turned away, walking slowly toward the window. For a moment, the grief returned. Not overwhelming,
But sharp.
focused. Because now there was no uncertainty left to hide behind. Daniel hadn't just died. He had been killed. Deliberately.
Carefully. Planned.
Olivia, Elizabeth said, softer now. We need to be careful. If she realizes the investigation is active. She already knows, I interrupted. Elizabeth frowned slightly. The message, I added. That wasn't random. That was timing.
She didn't argue.
Because she understood, which meant we were no longer just building a case. We were part of it. That afternoon, things escalated.
Fast.
Too fast. Detective Harris called me directly. Miss Olivia, he said, his tone direct. We attempted to bring Emily in for questioning this morning. And she wasn't home. My grip tightened around the phone. She left sometime during the night. Packed several bags. Staff said she seemed rushed. Of course she did. She's running, I said. Maybe, he replied. Or maybe she's repositioning. That word didn't sit well. Either way, he continued, we've issued an alert. But I need you to be careful. If she feels cornered. I understand. And I did. Because desperate people made reckless decisions. But Emily didn't strike me as reckless. She was controlled, calculated, which made her more dangerous, not less. After the call, I stayed at Elizabeth's house, not because I was afraid to go home, but because I knew this was no longer just about me. That evening, we received another piece of the puzzle, and this one changed everything. Elizabeth walked into the room holding her phone, her expression sharper than I had ever seen it.
They found him, she said.
Adrian,
I asked.
Yes. And she didn't answer immediately. He's talking. I felt my pulse slow instead of quicken, because this was it. This was the break. What did he say? Elizabeth exhaled slowly. He says Emily planned everything.
No surprise.
But then, he also said this isn't the first time. Silence filled the room. Not shock. Not disbelief. Just confirmation of something we already suspected. How many? I asked. At least 3, she said. 3. 3 lives. 3 carefully constructed stories. 3 deaths. All leading to the same outcome. Money.
Control.
Disappearance. Reinvention.
And Daniel was next, I said.
Elizabeth nodded. Yes. I sat down slowly, because now there was no illusion left. Emily wasn't just dangerous. She was practiced, experienced, and very, very good at what she did. Where is she now? I asked. They're still searching. That didn't sit right. Not at all. Because Emily didn't strike me as someone who would just disappear without a plan. She's not running, I said quietly. Elizabeth looked at me. She's watching. And almost as if the world wanted to prove me right, we heard it. A sound outside. A car. Slow. Deliberate. We both moved toward the window at the same time. And there it was. A black SUV parked across the street. Engine running. Windows tinted. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the passenger window lowered. And I saw her. Emily. Our eyes met.
No smile. No mask.
No performance. Just that same cold, calculating expression. She didn't wave.
Didn't speak.
Didn't move. She just looked at me, as if measuring something, as if deciding. Then, the window rolled back up, and the car drove away. I didn't move. Not immediately, because something inside me had just shifted. She's not afraid, Elizabeth said quietly behind me.
No. Iraplia.
And then I added, she thinks she still has control. Elizabeth stepped closer. But she doesn't. I turned slightly. Are you sure about that? Because if there was one thing I had learned about Emily, it was this. She never made a move unless she believed she was ahead. And if she wasn't running, if she was still watching, then that meant one thing. She still had something left. Something we hadn't found yet. And whatever that was, it was dangerous enough to make her stay. That night, Elizabeth insisted I stay. Not as a suggestion, as a decision. She knows where you are, she said, locking the doors herself, checking the security system twice. And now we know she's not trying to disappear. That makes her unpredictable. I didn't argue, not because I was afraid, but because I understood something had shifted. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a confrontation.
Direct.
Unavoidable. And it was getting closer. We didn't sleep much. Every sound in the house felt amplified. The wind against the windows, the distant hum of passing cars, the quiet creak of old wood settling in the walls. Around midnight, Elizabeth was still going through documents while I sat in the living room, staring at nothing, replaying that moment in my head. The way Emily looked at me. Not angry. Not desperate.
Certain.
As if she still had a move left. Around 2 a.m, my phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number again. I opened it slowly. You should have stopped when I warned you. I stared at the screen. Then another message came. Now it's too late. Elizabeth saw my expression and crossed the room instantly. What is it? I handed her the phone. Her jaw tightened as she read. She's escalating, she said.
No. Iraplia quietly.
She's preparing. Elizabeth looked at me. For what? Before I could answer, a loud crash shattered the silence.
Glass.
From the back of the house. We both froze for half a second. Then everything moved at once. Elizabeth grabbed the nearest object, a heavy glass vase, while I stepped toward the hallway, my pulse steady, not racing. Another sound. Footsteps.
Fast.
Retreating. By the time we reached the kitchen, the back door was swinging slightly open, shards of glass scattered across the floor. Someone was here, Elizabeth said, breathing hard. I know. We both moved cautiously toward the door, but didn't step outside. Not yet. Within minutes, sirens cut through the night. Blue lights flooded the walls as police cars pulled up outside. Detective Harris entered quickly, scanning the room with sharp, trained eyes. Are you both all right? Yes, Elizabeth said. He didn't get inside fully. Did you see him? Just a glimpse, she replied.
Male.
Dark clothing. He ran as soon as I reacted. Harris nodded, already turning to his team. Search the perimeter. As officers spread out across the property, I stood there, staring at the broken glass. She's running out of time, I said quietly. Harris looked at me. What makes you say that? Because this wasn't random, I replied. This was desperation. She needed something inside this house. Elizabeth frowned. What could possibly be here? I didn't answer immediately, because the thought had just formed, and I didn't like it. Information, I said finally. Or evidence she thinks we already have. Harris's expression sharpened. We need to move you both somewhere secure, he said. Immediately. This time I didn't resist, because now, it wasn't just a game of control anymore. It was a race. We were moved to a hotel within the hour, placed under police protection. The room was quiet, controlled, sterile, nothing like Elizabeth's home. Safe, but temporary. I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights blurred by rain. She's losing, Elizabeth said behind me. I shook my head slightly.
No.
Not yet, Olivia. She wouldn't take risks like that unless she believed she still had something to gain. Elizabeth was silent, because she knew I was right. The question was,
What?
The answer came sooner than expected. The next morning, Harris called.
We found him, he said.
Adrian,
I asked.
Yes. And he tried to run. Didn't get far. I closed my eyes briefly. And now, he's cooperating. Of course he was. Men like him always did when things collapsed. What is he saying? Harris didn't hesitate. He confirmed everything. The medication, the long-term poisoning, the forged will, all of it. My grip tightened slightly on the phone. And Emily? She orchestrated it, he said. From the beginning.
No surprise.
But then, there's more. I waited. He says she was planning to leave tonight. New identity. New country. That explained the urgency. The break-in. The threats. She's out of time, I said. Yes, Harris replied. And now so is he. The call ended. I stood there for a moment, letting it settle. This was it.
The end.
Or, at least, the beginning of it. Later that day, we got confirmation. Emily had been arrested. At the house. Not running. Not hiding. Packing. Preparing. Exactly as Adrian had said. She thought she still had a window, Elizabeth said. She always calculates, I replied. But this time, she miscalculated, Elizabeth finished. For the first time in days, silence felt different. Not heavy, not tense, just quiet. But relief didn't come. Not fully. Because justice doesn't erase loss. It only answers questions. And some answers come too late. A few days later, I returned to the house. My house. It felt the same. And completely different at the same time. The walls still held memories. But now, they held truth too. In Daniel's study, everything was exactly as he left it. His watch on the desk. Papers neatly arranged. A life interrupted mid-motion. I sat in his chair slowly. And for the first time since all of this began, I allowed myself to feel it. Not the anger. Not the strategy. Just grief.
Pure.
Unfiltered. Because no matter what we uncovered, no matter what she had done, it didn't bring him back. A few days later, I received something unexpected. A letter. From Daniel. Written shortly before his death. I read it alone. And with every word, the truth became even clearer. He had suspected. Not everything. But enough. Enough to feel something was wrong. Enough to try to protect what he could. But not enough to stop it. By the time I finished reading, my hands were steady, my breathing calm, because now there were no missing pieces left. Only acceptance. Emily would face trial. Adrian would testify. The truth would come out. and Daniel would finally have justice. That evening, I sat outside as the sun disappeared behind the horizon, the sky fading into quiet shades of gold and gray. Elizabeth joined me, placing a glass beside me. "It's over," she said. I looked ahead, not at the past, not at the house, but forward. "No," I said softly. "It's not over." She waited, because she understood. It's just finished, and those were not the same thing, because something had ended, but something else, something quieter, deeper, was just beginning. Not revenge, not anger, something else, something Daniel would have understood, and maybe something that would finally let me live again.